And we are live. My very first live stream with Aaron Smith-Levin. How you doing, my man?
Good. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. Now, we did an interview a couple days ago on your channel, and I have the very great pleasure of, as they say in Scientology, reversing the flows. So, hey, man, the very first question you asked me is what my YouTube channel was about and how I started it out. You have a YouTube channel called Growing Up in Scientology, which is obvious what it might be about. But how would you explain it, what your goals are, and also how you started it?
Yes. So I'll tell you, my goal is to have conversations about Scientology that are fair enough and accurate enough and relatable enough that if Scientologists stumble upon my content when they start questioning things, they go onto the internet for the first time, like I myself did back in 1998, that if they stumble upon my content, they're not repulsed by it, they're not turned off by it. It doesn't allow their Scientology programming to kick in and go, oh, this is just a hateful SP making up lies. My goal is that when they stumble upon my content, they go, oh, wow. One, this guy really obviously knows what he's talking about. And two, he's being really, really fair. You'll hear some Scientologists. Well, Paul Haggis comes to mind. He saw Tommy Davis on TV lying about something. And his first instinct was, geez, if he's lying about something that obvious, what else is he lying about? I don't want Scientologists to have any of that reaction when they watch my content. I want them to have the opposite reaction. I want them to go, oh, shit, I know that's true. If the stuff I'm able to know is true, then maybe the stuff I've been told is not true might also be true. That is my goal. Now, I have side goals, like I really like trolling David Miscavige. I really like, because, OSA, the Office of Special Affairs staff members in Scientology, they have to watch our content.
Do they? For sure, Aaron?
Well, they have to, not because they give a shit what we say, they give a shit who's saying it with us. So, like, if some under the radar if some Scientologist or some under the radar Scientologist or whatever comes on your channel and Scientology doesn't yet know that they've lost this person, they watch our videos just to find out things like that.
Wow, I never thought of that.
Like when Chris Shelton interviewed that guy who calls himself the Insider. Well, Scientology's they're trying to figure out who that guy is.
Yeah.
So they watch everything. And actually, here's another example of how we know they watch our content is I did a video about David O'Donnell putting up a bunch of posts on Instagram pretending he was helping in Fort Myers when it wasn't Fort Myers. By the end of the day, he had edited all of his Instagram posts to say Northport instead of Fort Myers.
So he's obviously really watching your freaking videos, and it got back to David O'Donnell himself. Yeah. That's the power of what we're doing, man. That's awesome.
And David O'Donnell isn't watching my channel, so someone in the Office of Special Affairs contacted someone who contacted David O'Donnell and like, hey, dude, you're giving the SPs this ammunition. They're making us look like idiots. Don't do that.
That's so funny. And by the way, for the listeners, Aaron has a video on David O'Donnell that when I watched it freaked me out because I personally knew that guy around Celebrity Center. He's the first person that I ever met that he was real arrogant. He's like a C-level actor. He's married to Jennifer Aspen. And I just said hi to him. And my first experience at CC was him just blowing me off. So that, Aaron, do you trip out when do you see certain of your buddies back in the Sea Org, back at Flag or whatever that pop up in these videos where you can't believe they're still in or do you not run across people like that? Any names pop up?
You don't see a ton of Scientology content where Sea Org members are actually showing their faces that much these days. But, I remember just in the videos that Scientology produced to put up on the hate website they created about me, I was shocked at how many of those young, people my age or younger were still in Scientology enough that they're willing to sit down and record a video like that. I was like, oh man, I'm like, pretty soon you're not going to be able to have children anymore. Like you've wasted, these are people who've been in the Sea Org since they were teenagers. And, they're in their, well, I'm in my early 30s and some of these people are younger than me, but some of these people are older than me. And I know they've still been in since they're teens. I'm like, might be in your late 40s by now. Like
Yeah.
you're reaching that point pretty quickly where you're going to have that I wasted my entire life
Yep.
I didn't have to have that regret by the time I left Scientology.
Because you left early, Aaron, because you still have a life.
It was exactly. I mean, exactly. So I officially got declared in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So that, what was I? Is that 34? Yeah, I was 34. That's still young. And plus, I'd left the Sea Org much sooner than that. And when I say I wasted my whole life regret, that really refers more to whether someone has been in the Sea Org their whole life. And that's who I'm referring to. People who've been in the Sea Org, because, they can't.
I know, bro.
If they left the Sea Org 10 years ago and they were just living life as a public Scientologist, well, okay, at least you actually have a life, but not if you're in the Sea Org.
That's why I feel so bad for you guys. And we differentiated in our interview the difference between that, because I mean, congratulations on getting out, dude, and all of you Sea Orgs, because I almost wanted to kill myself and the decompression was horrible. And I was just a public member. You guys have nowhere to go. Thank God for the Aftermath Foundation. I wish that was around just when I was around, man, because do you always have to escape this? Well, I guess we'll get to this because I want to tell your story, growing up in Scientology, but just to cut to the end real quick, did you get booted out of the Sea Org? Did you leave okay on good terms? This is in 2006, right? When you extracted yourself at Flag. Do all Sea Org members have to escape is what I'm asking. You know what I mean?
Most Sea Org members don't have to escape, but if you want to leave the Sea Org on your own terms instead of the Sea Org's terms, then yes, you do have to escape. But by the time when me and my wife were leaving the Sea Organization, we had every intention of continuing to be Scientologists. So we were prepared to leave on their terms, which is what we did. So, we were having a baby and made it very clear on day one that we were not going to be getting an abortion. Now, we didn't realize it at the time, but behind the scenes, Scientology was getting a lot of legal heat for pressuring Sea Org members to have abortions. Like this was coming up in lawsuits, but we in the Sea Org have no awareness of such lawsuits. So I'm mentioning that because we were given almost no pressure whatsoever to stay. Because
of being married, a daughter on the way,
because of the lawsuits that we didn't know were happening at the time.
And did those kind of get shut down because it became in the public consciousness that that's what was happening? Didn't they kind of stop that as a result of getting so much heat from the news and the press?
Well, exactly. But at this point, and I might have my dates wrong on this, at this point, it wasn't even the fact that the heat was in the press. It's that there was a lawsuit. This was the Laura DiCrescenzo lawsuit.
Right. I remember
and the essence of her lawsuit is that she was pressured and coerced and bullied, really, into getting an abortion in the Sea Org when she was still a minor. She was married, and she was still a minor though when she got pregnant, and all of the evidence of how much pressure was applied to her to convince her that she had to get an abortion or she was committing a harmful act against all of mankind. All this evidence was in her auditing folders. It was in her ethics folders. It was in her personnel folders. And, Scientology was actually forced by the court to turn over all of those files to Laura.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
Laura was given copies of her digital copies of her PC folders in this lawsuit. And you think, well, they must have destroyed all the evidence before they turned it over. Nope, they didn't.
Because that's a question that people were asking in the Danny Masterson trial. Like, why wouldn't they just destroy the evidence, the pre-clear folders and all that? Why do you think that they didn't? I mean, that's obstruction of justice, right? That would get them in even more hot water if they did that. Yeah,
because that's such a bigger crime than the original thing to begin with.
Right, but it's not beyond Scientology, though, so I'm surprised. I'm sure that went through their head.
It's not beyond them, but you and I know from auditing folders, it's like you have auditing folders. I mean, you have the worksheets from the auditing session, then you have summaries of the worksheets, then you have summaries of the summaries, then you've got a summary of that. like you start destroying evidence in an auditing folder, it's extremely obvious and impossible to cover up. Oh, there's just magically a missing gap in the auditing folder. There's no such thing as a gap in an auditing folder. So they really had no choice but to turn over the evidence. And this is why, it took, I think it took about 10 years from the time Laura DiCrescenzo's lawsuit was filed to the date they were scheduled to finally go to trial. Scientology settled either the day or the day before. 10 years after the lawsuit was filed.
Wow.
A day before they were scheduled to get into that courtroom, Scientology settled and and that's Scientology strategy always.
I was just going to say that. Yep. And then pay out at the last minute.
Yeah. Because they can't afford to get into court. Did you know Scientology has never won a jury trial ever?
I had no idea. You're kidding me about that. Never. Are you kidding me? That's incredible. So they've never, are you sure about that? Not even one?
Every single time Scientology has wound up in front of a jury, they have lost.
Wow. Hence why Hubbard had these policies where you just bury the person and drag it out as long as you can. Yeah. And then only if you have to settle at the very end, so information doesn't come out, do you do that. But I had no idea that they haven't won a single one. Yeah. Oh my God. What do you think was going to happen real quick with this Masterson thing? What's your take on it? And how much do you think Scientology is influencing or doing a good job of what they usually do about keeping their name out and or shutting this trial down?
I think Scientology realized years ago that they already had way too many fingerprints on this case. And I think they're staying away from it. But again, even as I say that, I'm like, there's almost no question that some of these random attorneys in the gallery are there on behalf of Scientology.
Exactly.
So they're keeping tabs on it, but they're keeping their fingerprints off of it. Like, I don't think any, well, God, I'm almost contradicting myself here. Okay. They realized long ago they have way too many fingerprints on this. Mm-hmm. So they're being very, very careful about really staying away from this thing. Because the truth is, Scientology's not on trial in this case.
That's true.
So Scientology can only hurt themselves more by trying to be involved in it. Scientology already looks horrible in this trial. Trying to prevent Scientology from looking even worse is just a fool's errand. So I guess what I'm really trying to say here is I think Danny's going to prison, and I don't think Scientology is really doing anything behind the scenes right now to prevent that from happening.
Do you think they're scared about the civil trial coming up? And then also, as a result of the Masterson thing, do you think there's a potential for Scientology to get pulled into this after the case, after the civil trial, perhaps to look at cover-ups? Is there anything that could come out of what, even though they're not on trial, just what is getting revealed in and around Scientology?
So after personally asking Mike Rinder about this, and there's a really knowledgeable attorney named Zach Morgan, who I've been talking with about this subject.
That's great.
After getting both of their opinions on this subject, I've come around to the belief that the chances of the prosecution wasting their time to go after Scientology for obstructing justice in this case doesn't seem very likely.
Damn it, man.
I mean, I tend to think that everyone has the same gusto for wanting to hang Scientology with anything they can. But when you're talking about a district attorney, you've got budgets, you've got personnel, you've got all you're managing, an office, a team here. And when you consider that you're not going to get the Church of Scientology or David Miscavige on obstruction, most likely. You'd probably get a Julian Schwartz or a Miranda Scoggins or maybe who was the Eric Geisler is the Scientology spy guy who tried to intimidate Damian Perkins, who's one of the witnesses in the case. You'd only get one of these low-level guys, and you've wasted all that time just for that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't think Scientology is going to be on the hook for obstruction in this. But as far as are they afraid of the civil case? Oh, they're more afraid of the civil case than this criminal case. They're not on trial in the criminal case. Oh, shoot, I forgot to put in my headphones. But is the audio? Are you hearing?
You sound just fine. Okay, and can someone type in the chat whether or not you can hear Aaron and me okay?
No. Yeah, I just realized
you sound fine on this
audio
end.
Might be hitting my microphone. So let me.
How does the audio sound, guys? How does we'll see what somebody has to say.
I'll just do this for proper form. There we go.
Aaron needs to be louder. How does he sound now with his headphones in?
There we go. This is going to be good.
Okay, Goldie, by the way, thanks for moderating. Goldie, I hit the 3 little things next to your name, which YouTube told me would make you the moderator, but I only have the option to either put you in timeout or block users. So I'll figure out how to make you the moderator, but with the official wrench. But thanks for showing up, and she is the moderator, FYI, in the chat, and I appreciate you being here. Aaron, what the heck do you think it's going to take to actually, remove Scientology's tax-exempt status as the main goal to kind of get them, to stop doing so many criminal activities? What's the whole, 7-decade history, the bodies are buried left and right. They've done every known human criminal / mafia action known to man. What's it going to take to actually hold them to account?
So I think it will take, I think the first step will be getting them prosecuted for financial crimes. Mm-hmm. And I should probably go on the record saying, I think we colloquially say bodies are buried, but I definitely don't think Scientology is behind any murders. Do you?
None at all? Yeah, I do. Well, I would just put Lisa McPherson in that. That's not an outright what you call murder, but that's my definition. Okay. Maybe negligent murder. And sense. Yeah, I do. I don't know if I could. I doubt I'd be able to. Maybe I could prove it. Maybe we'll be doing.
I don't mean not responsible for deaths. I just mean actual murder.
Yeah. That's a question mark. My jury's out on that. I think it's definitely not beyond them. But as you mentioned, I think in one of your videos, and you're right about it, they don't go for murder. L. Ron Hubbard wanted to keep people alive and torture them, especially if they left Scientology. So I think that would be an absolute last resort. Look at what they did with Minton and stuff like that. Why don't they just, Bob Minton, when he was protesting, why not just take him out? But they don't. They just bury him, harass him, and then but they have definitely, would you agree that they've caused people to suicide themselves, that leave the church, and they have a lot of deaths that might not be murders, but a lot of bodies because of the trauma that they inflict on people.
Oh, I totally agree with that. No question about it. So the answer,
financial crimes. You think you're going to get them on financial crimes? Something to do with what the insider was revealing about how they're doing the scam with the credit card. Something a little less minor than killing someone. Something along the lines of that. You think we'll get them eventually?
100%.
Do you have any idea when you think that might be? Is it coming in the next 5 years, or is it coming in the next 50 years?
I think we'll see charges sooner than 5 years, and then it's
Really?
anyone's guess. It's anyone's guess how long Scientology will be able to drag that out.
Yeah,
but I don't expect Scientology will be able to skate or get. Now it's still not a certainty that once you get the felony convictions, it's not a certainty that the IRS tax exemption gets reviewed and revoked. But I do think that's the impetus required in order to give the IRS the air cover it needs to start that process and be able to justify why they started the process.
That makes a lot of sense.
Short of a felony conviction, I don't think the IRS has a justification to start the process, or at least, you know what I mean?
I do.
It needs to be as clean as possible. Also, there's another thing. Once this process gets started, Mike Rinder actually points this out in his book, A Billion Years. He says, when the IRS gave Scientology its tax exemption back in 1993, many people don't know it was already revoked once. It was in contravention of a Supreme Court decision that ruled donations to Scientology were not tax deductible. And the Supreme Court has never revisited that decision. And it does contradict the IRS's, the decision the IRS made. So you also have all the documentation that Scientology engaged in a harassment campaign against hundreds, if not a couple thousand.
1,100 at least. 1,100 at least.
And so you have two things that are already would already be working in the IRS's favor to justify a review, and yet a present time felony conviction, I believe, would give the IRS the air cover that it needs. You still need someone at the IRS willing to go through all of the shit because then Scientology will once again be fighting for its life.
Yep. And it'll be a lifetime endeavor to try to take them down. Who's ever going to invest in that? That's the problem, right, Aaron?
Totally. So you still have that huge question mark of, okay, is someone going to be in that role who's willing to take that on? We don't know.
Yeah.
But the felony conviction, in my opinion, is step one. And I think we will see that.
Could you imagine that day? Do you think David Miscavige will run off to an island, or he'll be in handcuffs? Do you think he'll go in hiding when that day happens?
Well, I don't think Miscavige, I think it's questionable whether Miscavige personally would be on the hook for going to, like, just because Scientology is found guilty of a felony doesn't necessarily mean anyone's going to prison. And if someone is going to prison, it's not necessarily David Miscavige. But, and it's funny because I asked Mike the same question when I interviewed him last week. I said, if Miscavige does get indicted, do you think he's the kind of guy who's going to, you know, face up to it and fight the charges, or will he flee? Mike's opinion was that Miscavige would definitely flee.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't think his narcissism would cause him to sit there and fight it and go, oh, hell no, I know I'm in the right? He would cower out right away.
Apparently not. For me, like, because I never knew Miscavige personally. I never worked with him. To me, just from what we hear and what we know, it seems like it'd kind of be a coin toss. Like,
yeah, that's what I'd say.
Mike was leaning much more in the direction of fleeing.
He would know, man. He would know. That's very interesting. Do you think that part of the reason why they would need a conviction, a fraud conviction or something, is because if someone's going to take them on and go through the 50-year battle to fight Scientology, which is what it's going to take, does that give them more leeway on not the public saying, hey, because what they're going to say, Aaron, is you're persecuting a religion. Who next? Christians? Who next? Catholicism? They're going to say, like, they're going to cry religious bigotry. Do you think an actual felony conviction would override that do you know what I'm saying? Like, why do they need that when they've already done a really snaky, illegal deal with the IRS? And that should be enough to maybe get them to revisit it. But they won't because of what? Why do you think? Why do you think they specifically need that solid conviction?
I mean, this is just my opinion, but I think the reason I would give is because then the IRS isn't just going with no external influence, really. Oh, oops, we made a mistake. Like, how do you justify that legally? Like, oops, you made a mistake. I mean,
I know, but they did.
But you go, well, didn't you know you made a mistake 1 year after, 5 years after, 10 years after, 20 years after?
Right.
How do you make the legal argument why you're revisiting it now?
That's a great point.
And I'm just saying, if you get a present time felony conviction, you don't have to go, oops, we made a mistake. We go, the fact that this is, I mean, because the felonies that I'm thinking of, they're long felonies of long duration. It's not like you're going after an organization for something one person did one time. This is something that was going on throughout the entire organization worldwide for many years. How does that is more of a reflection of the essence, the actual DNA of the organization, not just one bad actor or a few bad actors.
Right.
You can't have something happening for years in the entire world and have that not reflect on the organization itself.
Of course. And they don't want to, as they would say in the cult, eat crow. Exactly. Right. That makes complete sense.
And so I just think that's what gives the IRS, what opens the door to going, okay, there's something serious happening here that requires our attention. And while we're at it, let's take a look at some of the historical things that are on our side as well. That's how I think about it.
That makes a lot of sense, man. Thanks for breaking that down, because I've often, until the last few months, when you and a lot of people have been pumping out videos and shining a spotlight on Scientology like never before, up until the last few months, I thought there's no way they're going to take away their tax-exempt status and no way Scientology is going down in my lifetime. But I think the public pressure there's so many people speaking out now, man. Each person counts, where I think someone's going to see this as their opportunity. But you and I know it's going to take someone with balls of steel, because they're going to have to make it their life. And then, like you said, they're going to have to find something else so that the IRS themselves, Fred Goldberg, doesn't have to eat crow. Aaron, how about I really wanted to know, I saw your episode on the aftermath, which makes me freaking cry every time I see it. I'm really sorry what happened to Colin, man. And I actually lost my best friend in a car accident as well. And I don't want to talk about anything you don't want to. Okay. So just tell me if it's too much, but it's important that people know what Scientology does to people. I wanted to suicide myself for a couple of years when I got out. My best friend, his name was Nick Lashaway, and he was 28 years old. And we were coming out together. And he was stuck with his family still being in Scientology. And he literally lost his mind. He could only go so far before he told me, who was trying to help him out, to fuck off and to stop bringing it up. And then he died in a car accident. Once, I don't believe Scientology had nothing to do with it, but he was in such a bad head state. I that Scientology killed him in a roundabout way, if you know what I mean. And that's the kind of damage that, you know, and with your brother, that's what Scientology actually does to people.
Yeah.
When you let's go to the beginning. So your mom was the one that originally got into it, and she moved you guys to Flag. How old were you when she got into it, and how did she get into it? Was she turned onto it by a Dianetics book? How did it start with her?
So she had a friend named Cheryl Scordato. Cheryl and Bill Scordato were longtime Scientologists in the Philadelphia area. And Cheryl introduced my mom to Scientology. I don't know how she met Cheryl. It may honestly have been something like it was. So we were 4 years old when.
4 years old.
Yeah, when my mom got introduced to Scientology through Cheryl. And I have no idea how my mom even met Cheryl. But Cheryl has a son about 24, 25 days older than me and my brother. So, you know, they probably met through some sort of child related thing. I don't know. And so my mom like instantly joined staff in Philadelphia.
Really?
Yeah. And by the time I'm trying to think, so I was probably 6 or 7 years old when my mom then went to Flag for full-time training for like at least 6 months. And me and my brother and my then little brother and stepdad, you know, stayed behind in Jersey, Philly, wherever we were living at the time. So like, even at that young age, like my mom left 2 6-year-old sons and a 1-year-old to go for 6 months. I'm only mentioning that as an example of how dedicated she was at that. I'm sure it wasn't easy for her, but I'm just using that as an example of dedication. And so I led a relatively normal life up until 12 years old. Like we went to public school, we played baseball, whatever. So we weren't like, we were in the org a bunch, like at nights and weekends and stuff. But for the most part, we led a pretty normal life. And then the 1993 IRS tax recognition event, the tax recognition was announced at the 1993 IAS event. And then all orgs in the world were on a big kick to send 20 auditors to Flag for training.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so it is as a part of that recruitment effort that my mom, who had left staff, rejoined staff. Her new husband at that time joined staff. Her best friend and best friend's husband joined staff. Her best friend and best friend's husband's 2 kids joined staff. Me and my brother, my stepbrother, my sister all joined staff. So like the Smith clan and the DiMartino clan, because the other clan was the DiMartinos, Bonnie and Attilio DiMartino and their sons, Michael and Edward. So it was my mom, her husband, the 4 kids, Bonnie, 10, between the Smith clan and the DiMartino clan, 10, 4 adults and 6 kids joined staff.
Really? In this drive in 93 to get people on, right?
Yeah. So we were like half of the goddamn recruitment effort.
Wow. Did you have, Aaron, when you were just in and around the mission, were you taking courses while you were kind of a public Scientologist like me? Was the indoctrination going in? Did you do the communication course? And how much did your mom insist that you and your siblings do Scientology? Was she pretty hardcore?
Well, not do Scientology in the sense of like do real courses and whatnot, but I'll give you some examples. So now it wasn't a mission, it was the Philadelphia org.
Okay.
And in the beginning, we were in the org, but we were in the org because it had a nursery. So we were only there for childcare, and we were.
Wow, you were young.
We were a lot of trouble. All the kids in there. I can't even imagine. I can't believe the orgs did that. They would never do it today, because having 10 10 kids, all 6 years old and under, running around the org, running around the city of Philadelphia. I mean, geez,
Wow.
you can never do that today. So we weren't in the org at that young age to do courses. We were in there just as daycare while my mom was on staff, right? But I still remember probably being 7 or 8 years old and doing the Success Through Communication course in the academy. And Philadelphia didn't have an introductory course room and a major course room. They only had the major course room, so the academy. So we're in there with everyone else, hearing all the bull baiting and all that kind of stuff. I remember it just being, I don't know, mildly interesting. You know, we didn't necessarily really want to do the course, but
yeah,
we didn't necessarily hate it either. I remember
it was just the way it was, right? Just what you grew up with.
Just the way it was. I remember doing the Success Through Communication course and an old course called the 8 Dynamics course.
What's that?
It was just, I don't know. It was in a big fat green book, and it was just, you had to read a couple chapters. And I remember it had some very not safe for work photographs in there.
Really? I've never heard of that course. That was called the 8 Dynamics course?
Yeah, I mean, the entire big fat green book, I don't think was called the 8 Dynamics, but whatever you were supposed to study as a part of the course was in that big green book.
Okay. Okay.
And so those are the only courses I distinctly remember doing as a child, was Success Through Communication and the 8 Dynamics. However, in the 7th grade, so 7, 8, 10, I was 12 years old. All the kids were taking kung fu classes at some kung fu school near their house. And something happened, and I was knocked out. I hit my head on the ground in this concrete floor with thin carpet, and I got a concussion. I was unconscious for a bit. After that, my mom made me go to the Washington, D.C. org and get Book 1 Dianetics auditing.
Of course, to run it out.
Yeah. I remember that being horrible.
Really?
I remember hating every second of it, feeling trapped, not wanting to do it, feeling forced to do it, having to invent memories just to get out of the damn auditing session, having to learn what it meant to F in at the examiner. You had to go to the examiner after a Book 1 auditing session. Yeah. And I just remember fucking hating every second of it. There's something to be said for the psychic trauma that gets created in a child for being forced to undergo a version of therapy that you don't want to do.
I'm glad you said that. That's exactly my point.
It's really, really fucked up.
Yeah.
And I literally remember driving from DC back to Philadelphia, because we didn't really tell our mom, or I didn't tell my mom that I didn't want to do it because I didn't feel like I could tell her that.
Yeah.
And then something happened. I remember crying in the backseat of the car saying, I don't want to do that again. And she was like, oh my God, I didn't know. I'll never make you do that again. And I was like, okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And yet she did, because
well, she never made me get Dianetics auditing again, but we did join staff a year later.
Yeah. So how did that come about? So you're what, 12 years old, I think, right about then, in 1993. I would imagine it was that event and the recruiting drive coming to your org. Is that what pumped you up? And then also, Aaron, at this stage when you were not a fanatic, you were just more or less being made to do it. And believe me, I know the trauma, because that's what I talk about too. It's like, I don't want to do this, Mom and Dad. So how do you go from that to eventually, getting into the Sea Org at the top technical training place on the planet, Flag? And what was your crossing over point where you liked Scientology?
So, well, remember, I didn't join the Sea Org until I was 22 years old, much later.
But staff before that, right? Staff at Flag. Sure. Well, take us through it. Yeah.
So, the recruitment drive wasn't a recruitment drive for Flag. It was a recruitment drive for each of the orgs to recruit auditors for their own org and send those auditors for training to Flag. And
Got it.
What it really was my mom had been wanting to rejoin staff for a long time, but didn't know how to do that with all these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone had the bright idea, well, if the kids join staff too, then they're not a problem. They're part of the solution. And it was really, looking back on it, it's hard to even remember the conversations. Like, kids don't have agency.
Yeah, I know.
That's one of my mom would be like, oh, you guys wanted to do it. We were 12. We wanted to do whatever you made us do.
Exactly.
So do I remember? I distinctly do have flashes of memories of particular conversations where I'm sort of psyching myself up and getting excited about this thing that we're going to do. But I remember even asking, like, so what exactly is auditing and what is an auditor? And so what exactly do you do? And it's like, to say that I wanted to do something that I didn't even understand what it was, never mind the fact that I was 12, it's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, good point.
It's like, just take a little bit of responsibility for the fact that you made your kids do the thing you wanted them to do. It's like, it's just the reality of it.
Have you and your mom since talked and kind of worked that out? And are you on good terms with that? Have you had that discussion like, Mom, what were you thinking? God, because there is trauma. There is childhood trauma doing that crap that you don't even know what you're involved with. Are you and your mom on good terms?
Let's say we've talked, and let's say it's not worked out.
Sorry, Aaron, I didn't know that. I thought you guys, hey, thanks for the honest answer. I'm sorry to hear that. I thought you guys might, again, this is another product of Scientology. So yeah, she kind of,
I mean, it's not untypical from the problem between the first generation
members
and the second generation members. Like,
I don't speak to my family, so yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, bro.
Yeah. So, no, it's not resolved because honestly, I've never had a conversation with her about it where she's said, without being completely snide and sarcastic, that, acknowledge that there's something wrong with how we were raised.
She won't even acknowledge that, Aaron?
Oh, no.
You're kidding me.
No.
Is she's out of Scientology? Is she out at the headspace too?
No. She's an independent Scientologist.
Do you think that's a big part? Do you think she'd have to deprogram along the lines of what you did, for lack of a better word, in order to actually come to terms with what she did to you guys?
I don't think that should be required. I think you should be able to understand that even if you still want to believe in Scientology, I think you should be able to recognize the destructive effects of the experience that we had. Mm-hmm. I mean, she can't seem to let go of the fact that there's positive experiences as well. And I go, yeah, the positive experiences aren't the damaging part.
Otherwise, we couldn't have joined. Yeah, of course there's going to be a quote unquote positive, but she doesn't want to. That's a typical Scientology thing too, isn't it? Always to have a smile on your face, always to think positive, always to be at serenity of beingness. And that takes, doesn't allow us to take. That's one of the biggest things when we come out of the cult, Aaron, I think, is we have to take responsibility for what we did to our friends, who we disconnected from, and how we treated people.
Right.
Do you think your mom will eventually come to some, really, man?
No, definitely not.
Wow. That says that it's interesting, man, to see the second gens come out before the parents. Like, my parents will not only never wake up, they would not be able to take responsibility. And it would kill them too if they knew what they had done to me and the family and everybody. Yeah. So after you get to Flag, what were you? Did you instantly join the Sea Org? What positions did you hold? And how did you kind of at 12 get into this whole world that you weren't even down with,
But remember, so when I'm 12, I'm sent to Flag for auditor training, but I'm still a Philadelphia staff member.
Got it. So how long were you at Flag for to train? And then how long did you go back to Philly for?
So I was at Flag until late 1996 when the Golden Age of Tech came out. And I went back to Philly in May 1996. And I was there. There was a little bit of a hiatus here, but I was essentially there until 2002. And 2002 is when I joined the Sea organization because my contract was up in 2002.
In the org in Philadelphia. Okay. And then what made you go to Flag? Were they just trying to pull you over there and they were trying to get, how did you wind up there? Why didn't you just stay at the org as a staff member?
But I didn't join the Sea Org at Flag. I joined the Sea Org in Los Angeles.
Okay. So you go from Philadelphia to Flag training. Yeah. And by the way, what did they have you train at Flag?
At first, I was training as an auditor, but then when the whole Golden Age of Tech thing was happening, we switched over to train as course supervisors.
Okay. And then did you go back as a course supervisor in Philadelphia? And then you wound up in LA somehow?
Yeah.
How did you wind up in LA?
So the short version here is I had you have to separate out the good experiences from the bad experiences. And you don't really see the results of the bad experiences sometimes until much later. Yes. But generally speaking, my experience at Flag from 93 to 96 was a very positive experience for me. And so by the time, while I was at Flag during that training, I wanted to join the Sea Org, but wasn't allowed to because we were part of this special training program, everybody was supposed to go back to their orgs. So I wasn't allowed to join the Sea Org when I was at Flag. When I went back to Philadelphia, I still very, very much wanted to join the Sea Org.
How come, Aaron, if you don't mind me asking real quick, what was the motivation?
Well, the easiest answer is probably the friend group that I made in Clearwater at Flag, both Sea Org members and non-Sea Org members, was just incomparable to anything I had experienced in life up until that point. I mean, school was not a great experience for me. A lot of anxiety, a lot of bullying, a lot of, we were kind of the poor kids in school. I don't have a lot of very enthusiastic memories of my childhood before going to Flag.
That makes sense.
And as hard as it was, as much hard work as being at Flag was, I sort of thrived and flourished in that environment at that time with those people.
That makes complete sense.
And also as a young person, you're coming up in life at that young age. Life is more about the things you can't do than it is about the things you can do. And, Scientology has that concept of you're all just immortal spiritual beings in old or young bodies. You're not young or old Thetans. And at that period of time, for me, in that environment with those people, that sort of being treated as an adult was very empowering for me. And I didn't personally receive the negative effects of those things as many others did in their own way. So I'm sorry, my computer's freaking out on me here. I hope you didn't lose me.
No, you're good.
And so, because that policy that Scientology has very negative potential ramifications, all of which I avoided during that time.
You talking about KSW?
No, I'm talking about that whole children aren't really children thing.
Yeah, which is the most evil part of Scientology, which is the part that allows our parents to justify giving us responsibility that should not be given to a kid. The concept, to the listeners, if they're not familiar with it, is when I was born and when Aaron was born, our Scientology parents are not looking at us like we're children. We're beings that have lived many, many lifetimes. We come in with those abilities that are suppressed in our subconscious, but nevertheless, we are already adults in child's body. That's a huge, huge part that once you buy into that, parents can justify almost anything with their kids because it's the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics.
Absolutely.
We can hear you just fine, by the way, if your light goes out and you still look fine. So just to let you know, in case you're freaking out over there. So Aaron, so you get your training at Flag, you want to join the Sea Org. And then when do you actually, I imagine when your contract is up, is that when you join? And was it in LA when you joined the Sea Org?
Correct. Now, when I went back to Philadelphia, there was definitely there was definitely a 2-year hiatus where I actually left staff. I moved to LA. I lived a normal life, and I eventually went back. And for the purposes of this story, we should probably just skip that part of the story.
Sure.
Because I did then go back. So I was in LA for 2 years off of staff, didn't have anything to do with Scientology for a couple of years. But then eventually I went back to Philadelphia to finish my contract. And that's why it took me until 2002 to finish a 5-year contract. It shouldn't have taken that long, but there was a 2-year hiatus where I was off of staff.
How did they let you out? Because once you signed, did you sign a 2.5 or a 5-year contract?
5-year contract that only starts after you finish your training.
Okay, and then how are you able to get a hiatus? Because once you sign that contract, aren't you stuck there for 5 years straight up?
Oh, I'm just using a nice word. They didn't give me a hiatus. I left. I said, "Fuck you."
Okay,
you can suck my balls. I'm out of here.
What was the impetus for that? What was the upset? Do you have an ARC break, Aaron?
Just the experience. Someone's asking me to turn up my volume. My volume I don't think I control my volume.
How would I control it over here?
I literally don't know. I've never had a volume problem on StreamYard before. Here, let me just
me neither.
A little closer to my face and see if that helps.
Okay, and hopefully I'm not overpowering. I'll try to pull back a little bit. Guys, let us know how it sounds as we carry on.
So, no, I mean, just life of being on staff was made so miserable by the DiMartinos. Bonnie DiMartino had become the ED. Her husband, Attilio, had become the LRH communicator. And their son, Edward DiMartino, was such a little covert snake, really. I mean, honestly, the DiMartinos made the experience of being a staff member in Philadelphia so horrible that I was like, yeah, go fuck yourselves. I got better shit to do with my life. I'm out of here.
But what about getting declared or still wanting to be a Scientologist? You had to toe the line a little bit, right?
You know, they made it so fucking horrible that it got to the point that I didn't care if I got declared.
Wow, really?
Even though I still considered myself a Scientologist, I was like, okay,
Right.
I left staff without permission, knowing that it might get me declared. That's how horrible they made being in Philadelphia for me. And funnily enough, I was always someone who sort of felt like the org and Scientology needed me more than I needed it. Like, I got better shit to do with my life if you're going to make my life this difficult, you know?
Wow. That's like balls, dude.
And so, but, you know, after 2 years in LA, you know, I just got to a point where I was like, I'm not sure how this turns out 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. And I just, you know, was convinced to go back and finish my contract in Philly. Now, I had every intention of finishing my contract, leaving staff, and going back and resuming the life that I'd been living in LA. And yet, when it got close to my contract, some people I'd known from childhood who were now senior executives in Sea Org management contacted me and was like, hey, we want to help you join the Sea Org. And I was like, you know what? All right, let's do it. And this was Alicia Collins and Heather Collins. Alicia Collins is someone people who went to Delphi, Oregon are probably familiar with. Anyway, she ended up becoming LRH Communicator International. And her sister, Heather, was in charge of recruitment at the American St. Hill organization. So between the two of them, I very quickly got replaced. And after like 8 years of wanting to join the Sea Org and then not wanting to join the Sea Org and whatever, I literally arrived in the Sea Org, I think August 12th, 2002. And I immediately went on post as the tech sec at Asho Day. And I was there for 4 years until I went over to AOLA for another 1.5 years or 2 years. And then, and honestly, the experience of being in the Sea Org in Los Angeles was horrible.
I don't doubt that.
It was horrible. And remember, my experience had been Flag. And even though my experience might not have been typical of everyone's experience at Flag, I had a relatively good experience at Flag.
Really?
I mean, as an out-of-org trainee, remember, I wasn't even a Sea
Org.
Oh,
right. Imagine being a Sea Org member there. They'd probably have a different story to tell. Yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine even Sea Org members who were out-of-org trainees at Flag had a different experience than the actual Sea Org members who are posted at Flag.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet in my mind, my experience was the experience. Remember, I was very young. It's not like I was sitting there, you know, realizing maybe my experience wasn't typical. So anyhow,
Aaron, sorry to interrupt, but people are saying that there's a big difference. Aaron sounds like he's halfway up compared to mine. I'll try to pull back on the mic and maybe Aaron can jump on the mic, but I don't know how to adjust the volume, my friends, on this end. It doesn't really give me the option. And normally StreamYard just matches the volumes automatically. So it's kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, I even have automatically adjust mic volume selected on
so do I.
The settings here. I've literally never had
me neither
a sound problem.
Guys, I'll pull back and Aaron can jump forward on the mic and then just, if you don't mind, let us know if it's getting any better. Yeah, MK Hogan says you're both audible, but Doug is a lot louder. Well, what do you expect me to do about it, MK? We're live. I don't know how the hell to operate this thing.
So maybe if you go back from your mic a little bit.
I will.
I'll get a little closer into mine.
And we'll get a little back. Hey, okay. So, you know, there's one thing I wanted to ask before we, you know, carry on with the rest of the story about when you were in LA. I think you were mentioning in Pope's video, Angry Gay Pope, you know, didn't you go online and start to suss a little bit? But you also made a really good point, which I know exactly what you're talking about, where the people that were trying to expose Scientology online, it just put you even more back into the cult mindset because they weren't exposing it correctly. What specifically, I know what you're talking about, but what specifically was not communicating by these suppressives that could have bursted you out of the bubble right then and there?
I'm going to give some examples, even though I'm not sure they're like literally the examples at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's just one off the top of my head. Even the fact of referring to Scientologists as clams was so incredibly insulting and off-putting. I didn't even get the joke, right? Because, I mean, the Clam Bake, the website, refers to Scientologists as clams. I mean, even Tony Ortega will still refer to Scientologists as clams.
Yeah.
I mean, it emotionally strikes me as being the equivalent, not that there's a historical equivalent. It's basically the N-word for Scientologists. I don't need to hear about how they're not equivalent. I understand they're not equivalent. Okay. So,
I just turned my volume down. How does this sound, guys?
I mean, yeah, to me, it sounded perfect the whole time. So
it sounds perfect over here too, but I just turned down my volume a little bit. Please continue.
Yeah. So like having a derogatory word that you use for Scientologists is never going to go over well to someone who's a Scientologist and starting to explore. And also, it's such a silly joke. Like the story about clams in the history of man has almost zero relevance to anything in Scientology that I didn't, as a Scientologist, even get the reference.
That's from History of Man, by the way.
It's from History of Man, which
which nobody reads.
No one reads it. Maybe now it's required reading because you do the chronological study, but it has no real relevance to what Scientologists really believe.
Exactly.
And it's just insulting for the sake of being insulting. People still use that word today over on Tony's blog.
Anytime it's insulting, I think you're turning off the Scientologist, right? Because you're just insulting him.
Yeah, and I don't even mean to say this like from a high horse. I like making fun of certain parts of Scientology. I make fun of David Miscavige for being short. I make fun of the OT3 story. I'm just speaking from real experience of the emotional reaction that it creates in me to see people use an intentionally derogatory word for Scientologists. It's not that hard to just say Scientologists.
Exactly. Were there any other points that they were making?
Things like, and again, this is an example where I don't know if it's a real one from the time, but when you hear someone talking about, let's just say, being a flag and referring to it as a prison, you're like, okay, but I was just at Flag for years, and to call it a prison, someone might have had an experience where they were being held prisoner somewhere, but to see this platform where things were being described in a particularly exaggerated fashion, and everybody was just swallowing it whole, like, oh yes, or Freewinds, the prison ship. Well, look, you can be sent to Freewinds and it can be acted as a prison, but if people now think the function of the Freewinds is to be a prison ship, it's just not accurate.
That's true.
Okay, so again, I might even be using not great examples, but these are real examples. Okay. And all I'm saying is, as someone in 1998, I was working at an internet cafe on Hollywood and Vine called Cyberjava. And I would spend a lot of time on the internet, and I dove into all these Scientology sites. And what I'm saying now isn't even a criticism of anyone who was speaking out at that time. It's just an honest reaction to the material that was on that website. As someone who still considered themselves a Scientologist, but was interested in seeing what was out there, what I saw on that site repulsed me and offended me and turned me away.
Makes complete sense.
And yet I'm willing to bet that 80% of everything on that site was actually true and correct. But the way that it was everything was just so derogatory and degrading. It was like, oh, this is gross. I don't want to be a part of it. It just made it real hard to take any of it in.
Yeah.
And so it's not, I definitely don't want to come across as saying there's only one way to talk about it. There's only one right way, because that's not true. It's just not true. I mean, the longer time I spend out of Scientology, the more funny I find those kind of things.
And kind of accurate too, right, Aaron? Because it's inaccurate that we were being in prison. What are you talking about? I can do whatever I want. That sounds like they were over-exaggerating it. And they do to a little bit. But as you know, our perceptions start to change when we come out of it. You're like, oh my God, I was psychologically abused. Oh my God, I was in a prison. A mental prison, as I can't pronounce that. Bill Bob says that's exactly what it is. But I did start to, if you're going to communicate to a Scientologist that's still trapped in, how do you think, and it would take another Scientologist probably to do that correctly, because otherwise they're going to throw out words like the Freewinds of prison ship and derogatory Operation Clam Bake and you brainwashed idiots. How do you think, let's say you had how do you think we would talk to people accurately that might pop them out of the bubble if, like you, because there's a lot of Scientologists out here in LA, Aaron, that just probably wander around and have the opportunity to use the internet. What do you think would pop them out of it?
I don't think there's anything you can proactively do to pop them out of it. But like what I said before is that my goal is to talk about Scientology and the Scientology experience in a way that would not be off-putting to someone who is still in, because even if I was saying something negative, I'm saying it in a way where they go, well, that's true though.
Right.
Well, that's true though. He nailed that one on the head.
Do you think you have Scientologists watching?
Oh, I know that I do, because because the people that we help who leave have shared with us how long they spent when they were still in secretly watching the videos.
No shit. That's really good to hear, because I honestly didn't think a single Scientologist would ever click on our video. What do you think? I never would have clicked on your video, Aaron, when I was in Scientology. So what do you think causes that? They're already on the fence a little bit. They're already questioning. What do you? I can't believe it.
One thing that helps is they're like, I think I know that guy.
Right. Just like when Mike came out, he was such a public figure. I knew who Mike was. We all knew who he was. So and Debbie Cook. Yeah.
Between the years that I spent at Flag and the years that I spent in Los Angeles, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, but that doesn't have a large Scientology population. But between the years I spent in Clearwater and Los Angeles, many Scientologists all over the world know who I am. Now that's less and less true these days, now that I've already been out of Scientology for 8 years.
Right.
But I think it's one thing that contributes to it is, I think I remember this guy. And then if they click on my videos a little bit, they see, oh, well, he's not just making shit up, and he's not exaggerating, and he's not being horribly derogatory, and he's kind of funny. Even Sea Org members these days are allowed to have devices and internet access. I mean, it's filtered, but I mean, it was becoming such a problem. It was becoming such a problem that Sea Org members were not in touch with their families, that Sea Org members were all given email addresses, and they were allowed to have like iPods or whatever. Generally speaking, they weren't allowed to have phones with cellular service. But these fucking idiots in the Sea Org don't realize that an iPod on Wi-Fi is the same thing as a cell phone with cellular service.
And isn't that how David Miscavige's father got out too? David was so dumb, he didn't realize giving him an iPad would give him access to the internet, which caused him to go online, which caused him to get the fuck out of there.
Or even a Kindle. I mean, I think Ron Senior was given a Kindle.
Yeah, that's what it was. Exactly. Wow, the power of information, right? Remember that Steve Hassan book we were talking about it's all about control of information is a big part of it. It's all about controlling that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Aaron, we're kind of I don't want to keep you all day, but I wanted to kind of wrap up your story here. So we're at 2006. You're in LA, right? As a Sea Org member. I believe you would be at the AO at this point, or Asho Day or Night. Okay, AO. What caused you in 2006 to either be booted out or leave?
My wife got pregnant. And so literally the day we found out she was pregnant, we held a little tiny miniature celebration in our birthing room. And then the next morning we went to muster. We were in different orgs, and immediately after morning muster, I went to the Dur-INR, one of the people responsible for staff ethics and justice, and I said, "Yeah, so Heather's pregnant, and we're not getting an abortion."
And you're out?
Well, then we were put on the routing form, and this just happened to coincide with like half of the base getting a massive stomach flu. So we were put on the routing form. So first I was immediately just put on doing physical labor, cleaning up shit and whatever. And then everyone got the stomach flu on the base. And so everyone was basically confined. There were so many people with the stomach flu. The place where they normally keep all the sick people was filled up. And my wife and I had our own room at this time. And so we were allowed to just stay in our room for like 2 weeks.
Wow. And was the routing out a big pain in the ass? Did they not want people leaving your circumstances? Did they look at that as kind of a cheap way out? Oh, she just got pregnant and Aaron wants to go. How hard did they work to hold on to you, or did they immediately want to get rid of you at that point?
Well, at that point, the atmosphere and the culture had changed. We didn't know it, but it was happening behind the scenes because of the lawsuit with Laura DiCrescenzo, that people in our circumstances, they wanted us to get the F out of there as fast as possible. So you're not going to believe
Wow,
this.
I'm surprised, man.
You're not going to believe this. Other than the maybe 3 weeks that we stayed, 2 to 3 weeks that we spent in our rooms waiting for someone to be able to give us a sec check, my entire sec check and KR handling took maybe 6 hours.
Get the fuck out of here. Is that because they desperately wanted to get you out of there? That's unheard of.
In my opinion, it's a combination of a few things. One, they desperately wanted to get us out of there. Two, my sec checker desperately wanted to get this thing done quickly. By the way, the girl who sec checked me herself left the Sea Org a few months later.
Really? Not because of anything to do with your particular sec check, right?
Well, no, nothing to do with my particular sec check, but her name was Amy Belcastro. And I mean, you'd have to think it does have some sort of an effect to see well-known, well-liked people leaving the Sea Org. Oh, and
definitely.
By the way, they got the red carpet treatment on the way out. They weren't even treated like pieces of shit, and it was easy and it was simple. When people see that happening, they're like,
"Oh yeah,
maybe I can get out of here easily and simply."
Wow.
Yeah, it was almost like nobody wanted this to be messy and nasty, and because my wife was very well known on the base. They don't want pregnant looking people walking around, and they kind of. I think they kind of knew I had the potential to be kind of a loose cannon, and they're like, let's get these two out of here.
That served you well because they can keep a lesser person who's not as challenging in there forever. And I'm surprised, Aaron, because it takes forever to get somebody to sign that contract. It's hard to get somebody to cross over that line. They almost got me many times into the Sea Org because I felt guilty. But that must be tough for them to offload anybody because they have to hold on to everyone they have because who wants to sign their life away for $1 billion years?
Yeah. Now, offloading somebody is different. That's when they're getting rid of you. But routing out, and that's why it's so ridiculous when they're like, oh, Aaron was kicked out. Oh, guys, getting pregnant and routing out of the Sea Org.
That's not being kicked out, yeah.
Getting kicked out of anything.
Right.
And so then we came to Clearwater and just, lived relatively normal lives within the Scientology bubble here from 2006 to 2009. 2009 is when the Truth Rundown articles came out in the Tampa Bay Times about Mike Rinder leaving and Marty Rathbun and Tom DeVocht and who else at that time? Is someone tapping? Are you tapping your mic? Someone something?
No, I was just tapping my. Can you hear it? You could hear that? Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to pull the mic away. Guys, I promise you when we do this next time, we'll be a little bit better to go. But this is the first time I've attempted live, and Aaron's been kind enough to be my guinea pig. Please continue.
And then, so from 2009 to 2014, I was essentially under the radar. Reading everything that was out there, reading everything that was online, commenting on the blogs. And as much as I was no longer believing the Scientology bullshit, there really was no part of me that expected to or wanted to get declared or no longer be a Scientologist. I mean, in the sense of the social aspect. I was working for a Scientologist. My wife was working for a Scientologist. All our friends were Scientologists. Our kids' friends were Scientologists. They were going to a Scientology school. Her whole family Scientologist. My little brother was a Scientologist. And no matter how much I no longer believed in Scientology, there was still no part of me that actually was trying to get declared or was okay with getting declared or even expected to get declared. In fact, I continued to believe I could never actually be declared.
What caused you to, I think it was a Truth Rundown, if I remember correctly. That was something that was put in a way where you're the top executives, you weren't being called clams, and it was put in a way where you knew these people. Is that when and then what was that like, Aaron, because it's crazy experience when we go through the mind snap and we start to get a very first glimpse when we realize we might have bought into a lie. So you're a hardcore, you're out in 2006, all the way up to at least 2009. You're still practicing. You still consider yourself a Scientologist. Was there one moment or several leading up to where you're at now?
No, the 2009. Up to now. Yes, there's several moments to where I got up to now. But it was so electrifying to see these reports in the press from executives I knew and trusted and believed. I mean, it was so electrifying for this stuff to come out. And when I say electrifying, Not devastating either. Like for me, it was exciting and electrifying. Like, oh,
really?
Shit. Like,
what about your own? Fuck, I fell for a con and feeling like, oh, you didn't feel, you really, it was electrifying. No, you didn't feel bad about yourself? Wow, man.
Not at all.
It was exciting. So what happened from the Truth Rundown on?
Well, eventually I actually got in touch with Mike Rinder and Marty Rathbun. And my first meeting with Mike Rinder was like in the middle of the Costco here in Clearwater. We stood there in the produce section for like 45 minutes.
What, did you guys have a secret meeting place, or are you trying to stay out of the way of Scientology? Are you serious? That's why you guys met at Costco? That's funny, dude. That's hilarious. Oh my God. So did you do a quick shift, Aaron, from you got over really quickly being quote unquote con, and you just went the other direction right away, not looking back, basically?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so
wow.
the two major points was, one, understanding how management really wasn't this utopia on earth, it was hell on earth, and understanding the all the intricacies and the ramifications of what that meant. And then the other major step was finding out from Dan Kuhn and Mike and Marty that there's no upper OT levels. And when I heard that, I was like, son of a bitch. Someone should have told me that 20 years ago.
Shit, how do you think I felt, man? I actually got up to OT3 when I found that. I was like, oh my, can you imagine that, Aaron? People in the bubble, they have no idea. The OT8s, they're legitimately waiting for 9 and 10 to come out. They're told if they get all the orgs up to St. Hill size all over the world, it'll finally be released. I mean, Miss Cabbage said that like 20 years ago. But do you remember that show? Damn it, I always forget. What was that show that was on Scientology with that guy from Breaking Bad? And they were mimicking Miscavige, The Path. Yeah. Wasn't there something in there where they made fun of the fact, because they were obviously basing it on Scientology without trying to actually say that's what it was. Didn't they make fun of something, or wasn't that a plot point where whoever the cult leader was on that show, they didn't have like the next levels, and they actually weren't, they were going to possibly make them up. Am I recalling that correctly?
I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
That's so funny. But can you imagine? I mean, what a con. My poor dad, man. He's been at OT8 for 20 years, and he is just sitting there waiting for. It's so sad. This guy, Ron, was so evil on conning all of us.
Yeah.
All right, Aaron, we've been going again. I don't want to keep you all day, man, but I got to ask you this before we wrap up. You still live at the same house and have the same neighbor as on the Aftermath show? Do you, is Goliath, has he been officially declared an SP? Has he gotten his SP declare, or is he allowed to go to and fro your house?
Nah, that neighbor had to disconnect from
No way. You're shitting me. Are you kidding me?
They made her put up a wooden fence in front of the chain link fence so
that I didn't know that.
So that she couldn't see the dog. Yeah. And yet, here's what's funny.
That's insane.
Sometimes when Goliath is outside, or if the gate's left open or whatever, he'll run around the block because she lives behind us. So he's got to run around the block, and he'll go sit outside her door. And then she has to bring him back, which is funny because she's not allowed to talk to us, but she's got to bring the dog back.
She, in all of this time, has not had the cognition yet of how stupid she looks.
It's so ridiculous. And here's what's silly about it. She's not even allowed to get auditing because she's got a medical condition. And
really?
She's not even allowed to get auditing or do the bridge, and she still lets Scientology dictate what she can do, how she can live her life. It's ridiculous.
I understand that too, man, because there was a lot of people in and around. There's a hardcore Scientologist, there's a Sea Org members, and then there's the people like me that are really trying to go up the bridge. But how many DBs, Aaron, did you see that were like, I knew a bunch of people that were like living at this house with a bunch of Scientologists, paying $50 a month for rent or something because there's a million people in there. And they're not really doing anything in Scientology, but they're eternally Scientologists at the lower levels, You know what I mean?
There is a house like that. When I was running for city council last year, I knocked on over 5,000 doors, and I did hit some Scientologists. Wow. And one of them was one of these sort of boarding houses that's not legally a boarding house, but there's like 15 freaking cars parked outside because all the Scientologists are splitting the rent.
Right. That's where I lived when I first came to LA. There's a lot of little cliques like that if they consider themselves Scientologists. Yeah, and they never go up the bridge.
And I knocked on this house, and he opened the door, and he goes, "I know you." And I go, "Oh,
here we go."
I go, "You're a Scientologist, huh?" And he's like, "Yep." I'm like, "All right, have a good day."
You didn't even try. You didn't even try, man. That's funny. How many Scientologists did you run in while you were during the 5,000? Just
maybe 10. Which itself is something to consider. You knock on 5,000 doors, you get 10 Scientologists. It shows you how few Scientologists there really are.
True. Did you ever get any nasty comments from any of them that recognized you?
Well, the flyer that I would hand out, specifically on the front, said something negative about Scientology, and so, and oftentimes, because I do know a lot of the Scientologists, and when you knock, you're not knocking on these doors blind. You have an app that all the registered voters and their names and their ages and their genders and everything. And so oftentimes I could tell before I was going up to the house that it was a Scientologist, and I would just skip
Oh, wow.
But if I couldn't tell on my flyer, there's like a 3-second window where I give them the flyer and I'm like, all right, we're going to find out in the next 3 seconds if this person's a Scientologist or not. And so one guy's like, well, you definitely don't have my vote. What's your problem? I pay taxes like everyone else.
Yeah, taxes to support Scientology to do their human rights abuses.
And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Why do you think there's never been a Scientologist on the city council? And he actually sat there for about 15 seconds thinking about it. He's like, well, I don't know. And I go, it's because there's nowhere near the number of Scientologists that Scientology says there is. Otherwise, there'd be a Scientologist on the city council. What do you think about that? He's like, I'm not talking with you anymore. Take this flyer. I said, no, the flyer's for you. Bye.
Wow. Hey, that was a close race too, man. And I'm surprised actually that you didn't win. I mean, I always suspect Scientology doing something behind the scenes. But hey, your popularity has increased massively. Are you going to run again?
I have no plans to. Let's put it that way.
I imagine that was a tremendous amount of work, bro, right?
An unbelievable amount of work. And honestly, I made a lot of enemies. Like I underestimated the degree to which Clearwater's political establishment has been co-opted by Scientology.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that.
I mean, the mayor of Clearwater's campaign was run by Scientology's lobbyist.
Wow.
Lena Teixeira, the woman I was running against, David Miscavige's representative was on the board of the nonprofit that she ran.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me though.
Yeah, and she won by less votes than there are voting Scientologists. And it was in an election when the voter turnout was very, very low because it was a midterm election. Mm-hmm. Voter turnout was down by over 30%. And the Scientology voter turnout, based on registered voters at Sea Org addresses, was up by over 16%.
That makes sense.
There was almost a 50-point swing in voter turnout between Scientologists and non-Scientologists, meaning some non-Scientologists went down while the Scientology vote went up. And when you have an election with a low voter turnout, the few Scientology votes that exist have much more impact. Mm-hmm. And so for the first time ever, Scientology can finally say that Lena Teixeira won her election because of Scientology's support. Scientology's never been able to say that about anybody before because there just aren't enough Scientologists in Clearwater who vote to usually impact the outcome of an election.
Right. That's kind of what they do to sell books and everything. They inflate the numbers and stuff. If you did decide to run again, I have a feeling you would win.
Possible.
But yeah, what you're doing right now is exposing Scientology a hell of a lot, dude. I personally appreciate it. And since, because everybody that's putting Scientology on the map, it's one day closer to taking away their tax exempt. So this can't happen to future kids like what me and you went through. I really appreciate you having me on, man. Is there anything you wanted to say before we end the session?
No, thanks for having me on. And if anyone wants to see the chat that I did with you, we had a great chat a few days ago on my channel. So you can see this interview was more Doug interviewing me, but a few days ago I kind of interviewed him a bit as well. So yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Hey, I would love to, because we didn't even get to scratch the surface. I have a whole bunch of questions that I really want to ask you, man, and we'll get the sound set up and everything. To the audience, I appreciate you guys showing up. I promise we'll get this all handled in the next time. Aaron, my friend, thank you very much. Until the next time.